Hi, welcome to Fiberchats. My name is Irina. I'm the host here. And my guest today is Ruth Nguyen from Red Earth Design Studio. Hi, Ruth. Thank you so much.
Hi, Irina. Thank you so much for having me.
So I have to tell you, the first time I was reading your blog, I was giggling. Like I was thinking, my God, this girl was like the most inventive child who was like so determined to learn how to knit. Tell me that story.
I think this is what's up on the blog. I grew up reading a lot of old fiction. I think it was being homeschooled, and I just grew up reading a lot of old, well, fiction and biographies. And one of my favorite things when I was a kid was Little House on the Prairie by Laura Ingalls Wilder. And there's a lot of knitting, because they were making all their own clothes, right? And so they were always talking about, you know, knitting socks or mittens or, lace to put on their clothing that they sewed or what have you. And I just thought that was the coolest thing. And I really, really wanted to do it. And so my first recollection of trying to knit was pulling out a pair of chopsticks. You know, I'm Vietnamese, so we have chopsticks, and so I pulled out chopsticks and string, and I'm not sure what I did with it. I don't really remember like what I thought knitting was supposed to be like, but I, tried making knots and things, and didn't get much of anywhere. And then we met a family through our Bible study that had a daughter that was about 5 or 6 years older than me. I was how old at the time? 7-ish, I think. And I saw her knitting in Bible study, and immediately I was just like, "Mom, can I meet that girl because I want to learn how to knit?" So she taught me how to knit. She just got me started on, casting on and binding off and knits and purls, and that was what I did for several years. And then eventually, I started getting really serious, and so I went to her, and she taught me for a couple of years. And I would go over to her house usually once a week, and she taught me basically everything else that I needed. So lace and cables and all that fun stuff.
Like when you were growing up, your mom didn't need, like nobody in the family. You were the first one.
Um, well, ish. So both of my grandmothers know how to knit. And, they learned in school in Vietnam when they were growing up, but neither of them really kept up with it. And I have a lot of needlework people in the family, so my grandmothers, both of them can sew, and my mom is a cross stitch queen. Like she's the kind of person that would do like the giant cross stitch of Da Vinci's The Last Supper, that takes like 5 years to do. She's one of those people. But yeah, I didn't grow up around people that were actively knitting.
So like you learned your basic knitting. Do you remember some of the first projects that you did?
Yeah, I think the first thing that I like finished thing that I made that wasn't just a random square. I made a baby blanket for my little brother. Let's see, I made a bag that I used for quite a long time. And it's funny, I don't know how I managed to get the use out of it that I did, because I knitted it at a very loose gauge and a very soft yarn. And so anytime you put anything in it, it would just like get completely distorted and completely wonky. But I used it for quite a while. I think those were the first finish objects that I remember. I'm not even sure where they are at this point, but
Do you remember when you were like first starting to knit, right? Was knitting for you something that you viewed as practical, or was it more like meditative, some like occupational thing that you do just to not to be bored? Like, how did you view it?
that's a good question. See, I think when I first started knitting seriously, I was early teens, maybe even preteen. And so I don't know that I was thinking about it that deeply at that age. I think it was more of a cool, I'm doing this thing that I read about in books kind of activity. Yeah, I think that was more the draw for me at that age. And then at some point, I started realizing just all the things I could do with it. Um, and I just wanted to try everything. I've always been kind of a self learner. And when I get into something, I want to know all the things and all about it and all the directions I could take it. So I enjoyed that aspect of it and just exploring and trying things. And so I don't think that it was like a super deep thing. I think at this point in my life, I think that it's kind of a twofold thing. I enjoy being able to make my own clothes and make them to fit me. I've always had trouble finding ready to wear stuff that fit me the way that I liked it.
Right.
So I enjoy that aspect of it. And then it's definitely a therapeutic thing too. Keeps me from getting in my head too much. I tend to overthink.
Well, I mean, like, yes, right? Like, we're talking about knitting as being therapeutic, as it's being meditative. And then you go on your blog and there is this, I'm not stressed, I'm not stressed. Does knitting ever stress you out?
Yes. Typically, it'll stress me out when it doesn't do what I want it to do. I think that even though I do enjoy again, the therapeutic aspect of it, ultimately, I think I am still a product knitter deep down inside. And I think one of the things that I love about knitting is all the different effects that you can make and um yeah, just all the different techniques and the way that you can combine things to get the visual effects that you want and the structural effects that you want. That's kind of what really intrigues me at the end of the day. So I'm always trying stuff. And so sometimes it doesn't go as expected. I'm working on a shawl design right now that's actually an adaptation of one of my earlier designs, and it's been driving me absolutely bonkers. I've been working on the math on this thing for a year. And last week I finally called my brother, who is a computer programmer, and he's a math whiz. I was like, you got to help me out with this because I'm not smart enough to figure this thing out, and he couldn't figure it out either. So I knew I was, well and truly cooked at that point.
Well, do you remember the first times when you felt like you were a designer and maybe there is a future for you as a knitwear designer?
Well, I typically count the start of my, my career, as it were, from September of 2018 when I got my first design acceptance letter. At that time, I wasn't really aware of Ravelry, and I wasn't really aware that indie patterns were a thing. But I saw that Knit Picks, whom I've been buying yarn from for a long time, was putting out submission calls for designers, and I'd been wanting to make up my own patterns for a while. Just again, I think the funny thing is that I wasn't really aware of all of the patterns that are out there, because I was still very much just buying magazines and shopping at craft stores for my patterns and things like that. And so I wasn't finding what I wanted. And so when I saw that Knit Picks was looking for people writing to write patterns for them, I thought, well, why not? And I very naively thought that it would be a good way to create passive income. That's not how it works at all. But I just went for it, and I think it took about a year for me to get to the point where I was starting to get acceptance letters. But my first one was September of 2018.
So you got that letter. What was your reaction?
I think I couldn't believe it for a few minutes. Yeah, I was kind of stunned. I think it was because it had taken me so long. I'd sent in a lot of submissions, and I was kind of not at that point where I was building up a thick skin to rejection letters at this point. And so it was still a little bit of a downer when I would, get a rejection letter. And I was getting used to it. Like, I was getting used to getting the rejection letters. And then when the acceptance letter came in and they offered me much more than I expected that they would, for first time out of the gate, it just kind of blew my mind. And I definitely had this moment of, am I actually good at this? Like, could I actually, like, legit do this? And So it was very validating. And yeah, at that point, it's just like, okay, let's do this, and then I couldn't stop.
Well, how was your first pattern received? Like, did people who know you were impressed with the fact that you're now a published designer?
Well, I don't know a lot of other knitters in person. My area is real sparse on knitting, on a knitting scene for some reason, and so we haven't been able to keep an LYS open. I've had people ask me to consider opening an LYS, and that's sort of kicked around in the back of my brain, but I don't know if we have enough of a knitting scene to support that. But the people that I know that are non-knitters were very impressed. They thought I was famous. And I was like, no, 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 I just have one pattern. But yeah, they all thought I was famous. So
Well, you know what I wanted to ask? Like when you write your first pattern, right? You sort of in that doubtful position, you're like, okay, am I really a designer or
yeah,
was it just like one time fluke sort of thing?
yeah,
Right?
yeah.
Was it more difficult for you to write the second pattern or was it easier because you already knew how to format and how to write it so it's like readable and easy to understand?
Well, I think that my second pattern, um, in some ways, it was a little bit easier in that I kind of knew the drill on, like you said, some things like formatting and language and those kinds of things. I do think that after that first pattern, I definitely got in my head about it a little bit more just because the editing process on that first pattern was very intimidating, partly because I didn't know what I was doing. And the poor tech editor that had to work on that first pattern must have just been like, where did they find this gal? And I think that, the pattern turned out pretty clean in the end, but it was definitely a lot of work. And so the second and third and fourth patterns, there was definitely a little bit of nerve just in terms of, oh man, like what am I missing and what am I forgetting? And, what am I formatting wrong? Again, chronic overthinker. But definitely, I think that I had confidence in terms of people like the designs that I'm putting out. Like it's not just me thinking that this would be fun to knit, but other people think so too. And so there was a confidence booster on that end of things.
Do you remember seeing like first person who made your design like on Ravelry and stuff?
Mhm.
How was
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. And it still is really fun every time I see somebody posting a project on Ravelry because it's funny, but I have a lot of kind of silent customers. A lot of them are the kind of people that will hop on Ravelry to browse patterns and they buy and maybe they don't post their projects. I think I also have a lot of customers that are kind of pattern collectors.
right?
And so I actually don't see a ton of projects compared to the number of people that buy the patterns. And so I'm always excited. And I love seeing what people do with it and, the modifications that they make to make it their own. I've had a few people ask me, like, does it bother you that I adjusted your pattern? Like, no, 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 no. You should totally do that. You're the boss of your knitting and all that jazz. So,
Well, let's talk about like business side of
mhm.
your designing. Do you put yourself on the schedule? Do you say like you have to wake up today and spend this much time designing and like enough with the knitting for myself? I have to concentrate on fall fashion and what's coming. Like how much of what comes out of your hand is planned?
um, it is pretty planned. I typically don't have a really strict sort of, you're going to wake up at this time and have lunch at this time. And it's partly because I'm an insomniac. And so my hours can be a little bit topsy turvy. But I do schedule things out in terms of, okay, I need to have this sample done by this time. Or, when, July rolls around, I need to start thinking about what I'm doing for Christmas. And, those kinds of things, just because everything needs to be done so far in advance. And I have done shotgun kinds of things before, like actually with this design, This was a rejected magazine submission, and I was planning to just, put it on the back burner, maybe do it next summer. But I had someone, Jocelyn from Owool, reach out and wanted to collaborate on something, and so that came together very quickly, and it was kind of an unplanned thing. But typically, I do plan things out, and I have, um, knitting quotas. Like I need to get this many inches down on the body of this sweater every day this week in order to, have it done.
Do you knit other people's patterns ever?
I do. I know a lot of designers don't, just, time constraints. But one thing that I decided when I realized that, knitting was kind of becoming a job and less of a hobby, I decided I was going to set aside 24 hours every week, to knit on other people's patterns. And I typically take Sundays off for religious reasons, but it's also a really good time for me to kind of do some what I call rest knitting. Um, and I really enjoy it. It's always a good learning experience. I feel like I don't want to kind of, um, get boxed into what I know and what I'm comfortable with. And I really want to, constantly be learning and seeing if there's a better way to do things than how I'm doing them, or learn new techniques or new ways of thinking about things. And so for me, it's a really important part of like, continuing ed, if you will, to knit other people's patterns.
Well, you also do crochet design. So how do you decide for yourself, like what you're gonna, what instrument calling your name, right? Like, I mean, do you see yourself as predominantly one thing or another, or are you like bilingual as far as crochet comes?
I am very, very comfortable crocheting. I'm not as advanced a crocheter as I am a knitter. And as far as, when to do what, part of it is, um, I build up hand strain sometimes because of all the needlework I'm doing. And so I find, because I knit right-handed, but then crochet left-handed, I typically like to kind of rotate back and forth between maybe, 75% knitting, because I do have a lot more knit customers. And so, maybe 75% knitting, 25% crochet. And I find that that ratio keeps me from, messing up my tendons or something like that. Then as far as like for a design, deciding, am I going to do a knit design or a crochet design? A lot of it comes down to the look that I want. When I'm exploring some inspiration, or, something structural that I want to try out, or a certain look that I want to create, I do think about what's possible within the boundaries of that craft, and kind of what that craft is ideal for. And then I make a decision about, this is going to be a knit thing or this is going to be a crochet thing. Right now, I'm planning a crochet design that's kind of inspired by like those big lacy collars that people wore during the Tudor time period. I mean, you know what I'm talking about. And doing that as a knit, knitted lace tends to drape a lot. I mean, this. Whereas with crochet, you can create something that's very lacy and very airy, but also has a lot of structure and stiffness to it. And so that's the kind of situation where I was like, yeah, this one's going to be crochet.
Well, let's talk about inspirations. Like you doing a lot of things that inspired by like classical music. You have a book with the shawls that were inspired by certain songs. Like, how do you get those ideas? Is that something you like see in your dream and then you have to wake up and write it down? Like, how does that work?
It's a really kind of organic thing. There's definitely those moments where I sit up in the middle of the night, again, insomniac, and I go, hey, that would be a really hot idea. But typically, it does take a little bit more mulling over. A lot of times, when I'm trying to conceptualize what I want, one thing that I do try to avoid is doing the thing that's expected. So, like, I'm not it's fall, so let's do pumpkins kind of person. And, no shade to pumpkin people. I know pumpkin designers that are incredible, like, pumpkin patterns, and they're amazing. I find that I tend to start stagnating. Like, I'm not the person that can make a really creative pumpkin. there are those people, and I'm not one of them. And so typically, there is kind of some seasonal input. A lot of times, honestly, I'm thinking about what's going to photograph well for the season. And then a lot of times it's just kind of whatever's marinating in my head at the time. So, like with the Tudor collar that I'm going to attempt this fall, um, I've been in a lot of, um, like historical fashion videos and studying up on that. I just find it really interesting. And so I think that a lot of those things have kind of been percolating in my head. Like with the music inspired designs, I'm a musician, and so a lot of times the designs will kind of come organically out of me studying the music and kind of getting to know the composition and getting to know the theory behind the piece and the lyrics and the history behind it. And a lot of times things will just kind of come organically out of that. And honestly, a lot of times it's just kind of emotional. Like I want to recreate kind of the emotions that I have attached to that, piece of music or that book or whatever.
Do you try to explain that to your followers? Like when you come up with a design idea, do you feel like it's your role as a creator to explain your idea behind it, or do you prefer when they come up with their own interpretation of your idea?
Really good question. I hmm. Well, typically it kind of depends on the format that I'm sharing on. So like on the blog, I will typically delve into a little bit more, kind of what I was thinking. Um, but I also think that I'm always excited when somebody will come across one of my designs and it'll bring up certain emotions for them or, it'll conjure up certain ideas in their minds. And to me, it's sort of like, patina on antiques where, you have the thing, like the lamp or the, fire irons or whatever antique thing it is. But over time, as it's being used and doing what it's meant to do, it kind of acquires additional levels of history. And so like this design, which was inspired by my Vietnamese heritage, I shared about that on the blog that it was inspired by me being Vietnamese and uh, the women in my family that have just been through a lot with the war and immigration and all of those things. And there were a lot of other Asian women from different backgrounds that reached out and said that it made them think of their grandmother or their aunt or their mom. And it brought up, things about their family history. And they were excited about kind of investing that aspect of their own background, kind of infusing that into the project. And that was really special to me that, something that was very personal to me was also personal to them in a way that was the same but different.
Right. It's so funny because yesterday I was with my child at a register of motor vehicle out of all places. And the person standing next to me was this big Scottish guy. And somehow the line was for an hour. So we had a conversation going and we came out with the conclusion that we had so much in common because we both came from cold places where people are like very no nonsense, practical, go do it sort of thing. And then we talked about cuisine and how much the cuisine has in common because it's all about like dried fish or jerky or preserves. So like, because this summer is so short, so there is a lot of preserving of fruits and vegetables for the winter, for the long winter ahead. So it's always like when you talk to somebody, even if you're coming from different cultural backgrounds, you can often find some points of like
Yes.
the sameness.
Yes. Yes. I had another experience like that with one of the classical music designs, where somebody reached out to me who is a Taekwondo instructor. And she was saying that, a lot of the principles of music that I had brought up, in my inspiration post about the creative decisions I was making about, how I wanted the design to look and everything. And she said, a lot of those same principles apply in Taekwondo. And that was really cool. Again, like it means a certain thing to me. And I was thinking along a certain track. But then again, it really sort of spins off into something else and it becomes special to people and they make it their own.
Well, when you look back at your designs, right, by now you have a whole collection of them. Is there a particular design that you like very proud of that means so much to you and like it happened the way you saw it happen and it's like the most satisfactory experience for you?
That's a hard question, mainly because I'm always super chuffed with myself when I have something new, and so it tends to be whatever the new thing is. I think one that I'm the most proud of, and I seriously don't know how this happened. I think it was a miracle because I don't know how the math worked out, but it did. Was one of the ones from that classical music collection, Nuit de Toile, and just the way that the short rows and the lace pattern worked out. Actually, I think that design was how I met you, if I remember correctly, on Instagram, was because of the Shetland lace stitch. I used bird's eye lace in that. I think that was actually how we met. And I'm always going to be proud of that one. I think it's my bestseller. And that's actually the one that I'm trying to adapt right now. And I'm trying to shrink it down. And that's why I say that, like, it must be witchcraft that the math worked out properly the first time, because trying to shrink this thing is anyhow. But that one I'm really proud of. I got really excited when I started designing garments and they were fitting me. On my first garment design, I'm always going to have a special place in my heart for that one, just because it was the first one and I learned so much from just kind of jumping in the deep end and doing it. But definitely there were things about the fit that were not ideal to me. I think that everyone has their preferred fit, right? And so that things like, that design had a very deep raglan and it had kind of a boat neck and things like that. And those are things that don't fit ideally for my body type. And so it was really exciting when I started coming out with some other garment designs. Like I think my silence tee, that one was that was the first garment that I'd done. I went, wow, like this fits exactly the way that I was hoping that it would. And so I got really excited about that one.
Well, are you ever concerned with how that garment that fits you so perfectly gonna fit to somebody who has completely different body type?
Yes, I do stress out about that a little bit, low key. And so typically I try to include a lot of information in the pattern about how people can customize it to fit them. It's like with the silence tee, I had some parameters about how I wanted it to fit. Like I tend to like my sleeves a little bit more snug, and so I won't make the armholes as deep on that. And I like my necklines a certain way, and like the body a certain length. I'm pretty short. But then I'll include a lot of information in there about how, if you want your armhole deeper, this is how you would achieve that. If you want your neckline wider or narrower, this is how you would make that happen. Those kinds of things, so that, I typically will try to make people aware of, like, this is how I like it fitted, and I will typically include a pretty detailed schematic and some, fit information about how it's fitting on me since I'm modeling the design, and then provide that information so people can make their own fit choices.
In one of the blogs, you were talking about how your relatives and your friends were donating some yarn to you when you were learning how to knit. What's that yarn stash looks like nowadays?
I would say, comparing to the stashes that I see on Instagram and on YouTube, I would say that I have like a level 5 or 6 out of 10 size stash. I try not to purchase too much yarn. Like I try not to buy yarn just because. And that's hard because, I was telling a friend the other day that what I do is like, so at times I feel like a pastry chef that is on a no sugar diet. Because I'm surrounded by it all day long. And, I'm always trying to keep up with what the trends are and what the latest and greatest new thing is. And, I have to exercise a lot of discipline to not purchase. And so, in terms of the yarn that I was given by family members, a good bit of that has been used up at this point. Earlier on, I was making a lot of stuffed animals, and that was actually a great learning experience in terms of just how shaping works and structure, knitting structure and things like that. And that's actually come in handy for designing garments, by the way. But so I used up a lot of the acrylic that I was gifted making the stuffed animals, and I still have some things kicking around that I hadn't been able to figure out how to use. So I'm actually working on a sweater right now. I'm hosting a budget sweater make along with a couple of other designers. And so I pulled some of that yarn from stash that I was gifted, ages ago, and I'm using that up. And I typically have a lot of work yarn cycling in and out, but that's not really stash. It's more like, okay, I went ahead and talked to the dyer about getting that yarn in now, but I don't necessarily have to start working on the sample until, a month from now. And so I'll typically have like this, revolving door of yarns that are coming in, but then they're getting used fairly quickly for work things. And then I have a little stash of kind of nice yarns that I get for myself, or, I'll ask for yarn for Christmas and things like that.
Is there like a favorite dyer that you have, or a couple of them?
Yeah, I think probably my go-to dyer is Sweet Georgia Yarns from Vancouver in Canada. I interned with them last year and got to know their product line really well. And I love their colors, and their stuff is really, really high quality. And so they are kind of my default. Even when I'm requesting yarn support, I'll kind of default to going there. A small dyer, like small scale, one woman operation that I really love is Huck and Ray Fiber Studio. She's out in Colorado Springs, I think. And her name's Megan. She's wonderful. And so I love her yarn. Trying to think. I love working with Miss Babs. Their yarns are always fantastic. I'm always discovering new dyers all the time, and again, it's hard not to want to buy all of the things. But yeah, those are some of my favorites off the top of my head.
Is there like a favorite color that you keep coming back to?
Um, I'm a burgundy kind of gal, which is funny because I don't think I've designed anything that was burgundy, but I'm definitely a burgundy, dark purple, dark red kind of gal. I have like a very specific shade of dark red. I have designed some things that were red, and I love finding a dyer that kind of hits the sweet spot and the kind of red that I like. I think generally speaking, I tend to gravitate towards like really kind of dark and moody, kind of gothic jewel tones. Anything that has a lot of nuance. So like a lot of kind of darker glazed colors. Kind of like really complex neutrals. That's kind of my happy place.
Well, when you design something, right? I mean, there's business approach to designing when you wake up and you're like, okay, fall is coming, fall colors are this, let me make some simple shawl, it's gonna sell wide, right? Or you can come up with some very interesting design idea that you know gonna take you forever to calculate, like the shawl that we just mentioned. How do you decide on complexity of your designs? Like, are you ever afraid to let your imagination go just because you don't know who is going to buy that?
Um, it kind of depends on the format. So like if I'm submitting to a third party call, I do know, okay, I want to dial this back a little bit. Typically because like with magazines and with, like e zines and those kinds of things, they typically want to limit their page count, and they don't want to have to deal with, all the customer service that's associated with customers being like, what is this thing and what is the pattern talking about? And so in a third party format, I typically will kind of stay in the intermediate ish, maybe even advanced beginner kind of range. For my self published designs, I will typically try and limit myself to, okay, I'm going to do something really complex. And then the next thing I do will be more of a palette cleanser. Um, but yeah, there definitely are those times where it's like, is anybody going to buy this thing? It did give me a big boost of confidence to kind of explore and, just let my imagination go wild when that really complex shawl did as well as it did. Because again, I thought that was one that very few people would be interested in just because it's kind of crazy. And it ended up being the best seller in the collection. And the simpler ones, they've all done fairly well, but the simpler ones haven't done nearly as well. And I think partly because they're a little bit more conventional, a little bit more expected. And I think my customer base, they tend to like things that are a little bit more kind of like, whoa, you can do that. And I think that's just kind of where my customers tend to be. So yeah, I don't have as much kind of fear and intimidation associated with that as I used to.
Well, is there some like knitting technique or crochet technique that intimidates you personally?
Three color stranded knitting. I can do it. I've done it a couple of times, but it's definitely something that will make me think twice before I, cast on something that requires three color at once. I'm trying to think. Um, let's see. That's a tough question. I think that there are probably a lot of things that I subconsciously do avoid a little bit. Um, but yeah, I would say definitely that's the one off the top of my head is the three color stranded knitting. There are definitely some crochet things. Like again, I can do tapestry crochet and I've designed with tapestry crochet, but it's a little bit cumbersome for me. Like ultra complex cables, I love the look of them and I want to do more of it, but sometimes it can get a little eye glazing thinking about all those hours trying to wrangle the cable needle. But yeah, there are definitely things that are intimidating to me.
What's in the works? Like, can you share some secrets that's coming our way that people can
Yeah.
expect from you?
Yeah. Well, by the time that this episode airs, I'll be pretty deep into releasing my fall capsule collection with Malabrigo. Um, the 5 design collection inspired by English country dance. And so I'm really excited for that. It's been a little while since I've done a capsule collection. So I'm really excited about all the pieces in it. And that's actually one that it was kind of emotional in terms of the design process because English country dance was something that I grew up with as a teenager. And there's a lot of memories. So that was a lot of fun to do. I have a pullover version of this design coming out later this fall, maybe heading into winter. So I'm looking forward to that. I'm trying to think. Um, I've already started working on 2023 stuff, and some of that I can't share yet, but it's really hard to sit on it because I'm super super excited about it. But yeah, I think that's what I can talk about for now.
Let's talk a little bit about social media and your relationship with it. Like, do you see it as source of inspiration? Do you see it as your fan base? Like, what's your relationship with all of that?
Well, you know how on Facebook, I don't know if they still have this, but you know how at one time on Facebook, they had like they would have like these relationship status markers where you could, kind of designate what your relationship to this person that you're friends with on Facebook. And there was one relationship status that was, it's complicated. Like that's my relationship with social media. It's definitely a source of inspiration for me. I love seeing what people are up to. I've met a lot of really cool people, people that I wouldn't have met otherwise, like Megan from Huck and Ray. We met on Instagram. I met you on Instagram. And so I love the aspect to where you can so easily see what's out there and you can find people that are doing really incredible work. And it's just a really great way to connect. And I do love a lot of the functionality of it. It's definitely been a great tool for me for my business. At the same time, I do think that it can kind of breed some things that are probably not sustainable. Like, it can be really tempting to kind of run your business on FOMO. It can be really tempting to sort of pounce on trends and then not really be yourself and develop your own aesthetic and those kinds of things. And so, I think that for me, it's one of those things where I try to keep the mindset of this is a tool and this is a useful tool and it's a it's a way to network, it's a way to meet people, but I don't want it to become a thing unto itself. Like I don't want social media to sort of be the reason I do things. I don't want to do something just for Instagram, just because it would look good on the grid. I want to be authentically myself and I want to do the things that are inspiring me and then hopefully find people that are inspired by the same things. And I don't want to just see people as, my fans. And I want to see people, as three-dimensionally as possible, and kind of invest in people and not just go, okay, I have, XYZ number of followers and see people as sort of like, a number count.
Right. And then I find like also for me, like with YouTube, I find like lots of times it's sort of this like you don't know if people are watching, you don't know how people are reacting. So every time I get like somebody commenting, I'm like, oh, I love that interview. For me, it's like, oh my God, somebody is watching out there, So it's like this Instagram, I feel like the same way. You post something and you don't really know who sees it, how many people see it, what they think about it. So it's this like screaming into the quiet sort of
yes
all the time. So it's nice when you can meet people and you can like develop this relationship because of that,
Yes. I think that's probably the best thing about Instagram as far as I'm concerned, and really any of the different forms of social media that are out there. It's the human connection. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at on the social media conversation.
Right. Well, so guys, go to social media, find Ruth, and say hi from Fiberchats.
Please say hi.
Well, I really loved getting to know you today. And, I'm glad that we've met on Instagram and I can't wait to see your full collection and what else you're going to create next year. It's like really exciting for me to watch your designs coming out. So
Well, thank you
so very much for being my guest today, Ruth.
Well, thank you for having me. It was a real honor to be here. And yeah, I'm really glad that we met too.
Thank you.